Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. We have lots to talk about again today. The fighting between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Who's in the right, who's in the wrong, and why should we care? We'll talk about Milwaukee Alderman Joe Davis making more noise about running against Mayor Tom Barrett. Is Barrett even beatable? And what qualities would you like to see in the next mayor if we get one? And we'll talk about the Milwaukee Brewers as they start the second half of their season. All right, let me introduce everybody before we get going. Of course, you know Joel McNally, the longtime newspaper columnist. Kevin Fischer, who spent many years as a broadcast journalist. Avi Lank joins us again, longtime business reporter, now an occasional essayist for WUWM Radio. And here's Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, more deadly fighting between Israel and the Palestinians this week in the Gaza Strip. Israel actually launched a ground invasion to stop Hamas from launching missiles into Israel. Is this just the constant state of affairs in that part of the world? Somebody asked me the other day if there's been one single day in the past 20 years that you've picked up a newspaper and you didn't see an article about fighting in the Middle East. Is most of the world on the side of Israel or the Palestinians? And Avi, why should people here even care?
Well, I'll tell you one reason I care, and that is that I have a cousin in Tel Aviv who's got missiles being fired over him. I don't have cousins in Gaza City, but I would feel the same way about them. We've got a problem there that is very difficult, that doesn't seem to have a solution given the current situation, and that is frankly quite sad. You've got a group, Hamas, that saw its power waning and decided the way it could exert its influence, again, inside the Palestinian community, certainly, was to pick a fight with Israel, and Israel took the bait. And it had to do with the death of these Israelis who'd been hitchhiking and were kidnapped, and then the revenge death, perhaps in Jerusalem, for which someone has been arrested. I don't think anybody's been arrested on the Palestinian side. And you get to the point where that kind of bullying behavior starts to drive politicians, and you don't have politicians with the leadership skills to divert it to constructive ends. You know, they probably still could have helped Kerry. You know, Kerry was running back and forth trying to make peace before this all happened. It's very hard to be optimistic about what's going on there, given the current state of the leadership in the area and given the grievances that both sides have that are legitimate or illegitimate, either in their eyes or in the eyes of their allies or foes. And, you know, I keep talking to my cousin on Facebook and having him tell me he was going to work today and a missile came over him. It's very hard for me to get completely analytical about this, but when I do get analytical about it, what it tells me is we just got to hunker down, wait for new leadership, wait for new political leadership on the ground over there, both on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And until then, it's just heart-rending, depressing, and very sad.
Kevin, what about the people who say, you know, they've been fighting over there for 10,000 years and they'll be fighting for the next 10,000?
Well, there's some truth to that. If people had the answers, well, then they'd be Secretary of State, or they'd have positions of power where that maybe their influence could do something about this. I don't see, certainly within our lifetimes, any foreseeable change over there. I can't blame the Israelis. I think they're highly justified in their actions. You have, you know, tunnels leading from Gaza into Israeli territory, and attacks taking place through those tunnels, missiles being launched at the Israelis. The Israelis have a long, consistent history of when provoked, they're not going to be patient. They have a short fuse. And they have to defend themselves. And there were two opportunities for a ceasefire, one that the Egyptians came up with, one that the United Nations came up with, that Israel agreed to, and Hamas apparently agreed to, but then kept firing the missiles. So Hamas does not want to acquiesce. They do not want to retreat. They don't want to give the impression that they're losers. So they continue on and they continue to provoke Israel. And Israel naturally is going to respond. And Hamas is talking trash. Well, bring it on, and the Israeli army will sink in the Gaza mud. Well, that's only going to make matters worse. But I think the Israelis are entirely justified at what they are doing.
Joel, as you look at things historically, do you think that this country and the media in this country is more sympathetic to Israel or to the Palestinians?
No, I think definitely the media and our government is more sympathetic to Israel, of course. But they're also part of the problem. I mean, we did create Israel. We were part of historically creating Israel in the land of another country. And not only that, but then arming Israel with enormous amounts of weapons. Avi's right. There are leadership problems on both sides, no question. And the fact that Hamas is kind of baiting, the more moderate leadership in the Palestinian side. But boy, Netanyahu, has no interest in making any kind of peace. In fact, he keeps moving more settlements into the land where the Palestinians are living, and there's just no proportionality. When Kevin talks about, they're defending themselves. There was a tragic incident where some hitchhikers got killed. And I think a couple days ago, an Israeli lost his life. While Israel, goes into a ground war and airstrikes that have killed almost 300 Palestinians and injured several thousand more. That's what upsets the world. The fact that neither side is really trying to, back off and come up with a two-state solution. And while the rest of the world says there has to be a two-state solution, you can't just wipe out the people who live in this country.
But Hamas is not backing off when really.
But Hamas does not have all the weaponry, and these missiles going into Israel. Israel has a missile defense system that makes them practically just an annoyance rather than danger.
Israel is winning this war. Israel is winning this war decisively, and Hamas should back off.
They have enormous weaponry we gave to them.
And Hamas, they haven't. I mean, other than maybe a few casualties on the Israeli side, they haven't struck any public buildings in Israel of import. There's been no property.
Exactly.
There's been no property
they're
damage.
the weak party.
But they continue to launch these missiles, and so you can't blame Israel for not backing off either.
These two sides can't coexist, can they?
I don't see that happening in the long run or the short run.
Not with the present leadership.
And unfortunately, Israel is being punished because it has superior technology that advantages it in terms of its defense. It's more than a mere annoyance when those missils keep coming across with the intent to kill. And if nothing else, destroy property. So Israel's response is that, well, okay, if it were one or two and the system took care of it, which we did help to provide, then that's one thing. But overall, that's not the case. One of the things that Kevin said, and this is two-part, I think, first off, the Egyptians have reasserted themselves in this discussion about what it will take in order to have a short-term solution to peace there. That's a positive. The other, though, I think, is now that the army, the Israeli army, has begun to move into Gaza, they, too, will have to begin to consider what the United States had to consider. If you go in, how do you extricate yourself? Or are you planning to be there for the long haul?
Israel has gotten out of Gaza several times. The reason Gaza exists is because Israel pulled out of it and because Egypt didn't want it when they made peace with Israel. But it goes back to leadership. You need good faith bargaining on both sides, and you need, with all due respect to Joel, you need for the world and for the Arabs to, even if grudgingly, admit and acknowledge that Israel is there to stay, the Jewish people need a homeland, and you have to find a solution that takes that into account.
And Hamas throws this whole thing into question.
There's no question that in the Palestinians in Gaza Strip are without water, they're without electricity most of the time. They have been economically prevented from success by Israel.
But Hamas
And
has
this-
brought that onto themselves.
They have wrought that.
The whole conflict has brought that. And that's what we're saying, that there needs to be some different kind of leadership than this aggressive Israeli leadership and the aggressive forces
I think
among the Palestinians.
it would be wonderful if you could get the two sides to sit down at the negotiating table. They won't, not when you have on each side a philosophy of shooting missiles first and maybe talking later, but that's not going to happen.
All right. Next topic, getting a little more local. Milwaukee Alderman Joe Davis has never been a big fan of Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. This week, he actually said he's going to explore the possibility of running against Barrett in 2016. Do you think Barrett is beatable by Davis or anybody else? And what qualities would you like to see in Milwaukee's next mayor if it wasn't Barrett?
I don't know that Joe Davis, and I know him and like him, but I don't think he has made that prominent a role in this community, partly because the media kind of ignores him as the media does most of the black aldermen. I do think that the next mayor will be an African American, and there's some very bright young African Americans starting in politics right now. We've sort of gone through the wave when some of the con men went through and got out of the way, and now we have some very strong, intelligent young leadership. And I believe that the next candidate for mayor will arise out of that group. I expect the next mayor to be African American, and maybe an African American that can beat Tom Barrett before he decides just to quit running. But that would be unusual in Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, we tend to elect our mayors for life, and when they're ready to step down, then we'll let it out. Have a free for all, and I think there's some very good potential candidates in the future.
Kevin, there are some people that think the only African American that would beat Tom Barrett would be David Clark.
Yeah, I think he would be he would be a formidable opponent. I like him, respect him, and he would. I think out of everyone that you could talk about, Willie Hines, Joe Davis, Lena Taylor, Gwen Moore, I think David Clark has that sort of aura about him, whether you like him or not. He has been the only African-American person of import to actually stand up and say, look, we have issues, we have problems, we have challenges, we need to do more than we're doing. And right now we're not doing much. But
he stands up and says outrageous things, and that does draw attention to himself.
He's a popular guy. And
furthermore,
not in the city.
It's Barrett's to keep. The incumbent has tremendous advantages, and he's run several statewide campaigns. And he's got a big war chest. It's as Joel said, and I think all of us would agree. It's his for as long as he wants it. When he does decide he doesn't want it, then Katie, open up the floodgates.
Right.
It's going to be, you're going to have, and it's not just African Americans. I think you will have some white business people who will decide to run as they have in the past. So, it's anybody's ball.
And you might even have at that point a Latino run too. I mean, I agree that it doesn't look like there's much that could stop Barrett if he decides he wants to run for re-election, but there's a couple of things about Mr. Clark, at least one thing. And besides the fact that I think he wouldn't be a really good mayor, but just tactically, he's got to get himself re-elected sheriff. The mayor's election is not until a year from April. And between now and then, we're going to elect a governor, and we may have a different sheriff. I don't know. I suppose if Mr. Clark loses the sheriff's election, that might embolden him to run for mayor, because what else is he going to do?
And I'll bet you a root beer that David Clark does not get defeated.
But Alderman Davis, he can do what he wants. I sort of agree with Joel. He's a nice guy, but I don't see anybody really thinking he's the kind of timber that the next mayor's coming from. I also agree with Joel that the mayor after Mr. Barrett probably will be a minority, and I would assume that it would be an African American, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a very legitimate Latino challenger also.
If Barrett suddenly said, I don't want this job anymore, and bowed out, who would the next mayor be?
Well, I hope he does that. I haven't been impressed with his leadership, but that's no secret on this show. I think the good thing about Joe Davis running is that the issues will get raised. They'll be raised with some passion. He won't be afraid to voice those areas of deficiency that the mayor's administration hasn't addressed. There are people who are truly afraid that we become more like a Chicago with respect to crime, or more like a Detroit with respect to economics. And while I don't think we're on that path, we can't say that those concerns aren't legitimate concerns. And I do believe that Joe Davis will bring some fresh energy to that debate. We haven't had that debate in this community the last 2 elections for mayor.
Right.
So even if he's not the successful candidate, I think he will embolden others to consider running. He will give some folks an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to put some money into a race that they perceive Barrett to be weak in running.
In what sense is Barrett weak on crime, though?
Please,
He's out there talking guns all the time. He's talking violence in the neighborhoods. He's even on the scene
after the
shootings.
fact, when he has no plan.
And I'm sorry, I thought I was talking, but you know, I just don't think you can pin the problems connected with violence and guns in this community on Tom Barrett. I think he is out there speaking on those issues, and I think, you know, Joe Davis and other people in the black community are right alongside him a lot.
But I think they have some solutions that the mayor's administration has not tried that are being tried in other cities successfully. Philadelphia, for example. Philadelphia has cut its rate of shootings by 1/3 in the last 5 years, by 1/3. So you know that if the shootings are cut by 1/3, then the resulting deaths are cut substantially as well. And they use a full-pronged approach that hasn't necessarily required applying more money, but simply using the resources that they have smarter. We don't do that here in Milwaukee. The president has just announced an effort to address the crime among young African-American males. And this city has not signed on to that yet, even though 200 other cities have. So I do fault the mayor for his lack of leadership. Even in the area of crime prevention or crime deterrence, he has not been as forceful as he could be. His administration has not been as creative as it could be, and I don't see it changing anywhere going forward as long as he's in that spot and the superintendent or the police chief that he is responsible for helping to select is the same one that we have now.
You know, the police chief seems to be getting high marks, and I think part of this discussion has illustrated the challenge that will face someone like Alderman Davis or whoever else it is. You're passionate about this, but I don't know a lot of other people who are. Mayor Barrett doesn't, when he's not running for governor, he doesn't seem to be a lightning rod. He doesn't seem to be the kind of person that brings out the kind of venomous anti-passion that a lot of other politicians do. That could be one of the problems he had running against Governor Walker. And it seems to me that unless he makes some huge blunder that would be quite out of character.
Running again would be one of those blunders.
Well, no. Unless he makes some kind of huge tactical or huge strategic blunder that is out of character given what we know of his career and his history. I don't see anybody credibly challenging him, and I would love to see him and Sheriff Clark go against each other, because I think Barrett would win and win handily.
But and I think what you're trying to say is that if the mayor decides to keep the job and keep running, and he does keep it, that it's going to be status quo, nothing will change, and the city will continue to have these problems that will not get addressed because
whereas they'll all go away if someone else is mayor.
If Clark were mayor, they'd all go away.
And a lot of the members of the Common Council, with the exception of maybe Alderman Donovan, are nowhere to be found on some of these serious issues.
All right, switching directions again. We have a lot of sports fans on this panel. So the Milwaukee Brewers start the second half of the season still on top of the National League Central Division. The first half didn't end that pretty, with loss after loss after loss. If they stay healthy, do you see a great second half, or do you see this team falling apart?
Oh, sorry.
Well, this loss after loss after loss was, what was it, 2 weeks? Yeah, they had a 2-week slump out of what, 3.5 months? I tend to believe that there are more like the 3.5 months
Here we
than,
go,
than the
chilling.
past 2 weeks. Boy, I was dying going into the All-Star break, but we still have a good lineup. We still have some of the best pitching we've ever had, both starting pitchers and the bullpen. We just brought up a young pitcher, who is very impressive. And he got killed in one. He got in his little shaky good against Adam Wainwright. I mean, you bring up a kid from the minor leagues and put him up against Adam Wainwright.
He had a nice outing.
Television, too.
Yeah. But we still have a very strong team. I doubt if we're going to mess with it much before the end of the month.
That what this team lacks. If you look at all the sabermeticians and everything else, and they would say that it was an anomaly the Brewers did as well as they did in the first half, if you do all the mathematics, and probably they were regressing to the mean and blah, blah, blah. I agree with Joel. I think this team's going to be playing into October, and I think it's going to be playing deep into October. And I think
I'll bet you another root beer on that.
Okay, and I think
You're such a negative guy, Kevin.
think before the end of the month, and maybe who knows, maybe even right now as we're talking, I think they're going to do something. They lack one thing really, really, really critically to go deep into October, and that is an absolute stud pitcher. A Sabathia type or a Greinke type. Something like that is going to happen. It's in the history of this team. I suspect
I don't think they want to give up as much as they would have to do that.
They're going to do something. They're going to do something to bolster their pitching. And, they've been doing a little bit spinning plates on the top of poles, but that happens in sports. And I haven't been as excited about a team since the Badgers won the National Collegiate Hockey Championship.
You're done.
Listen,
Look at my tie, my friend. Look at my
Bron
tie.
have to stay healthy, or is he not a big part of the equation
Well,
anymore?
of course he has to stay healthy. He can't be going out with a sore finger every third day. You need
almost 300.
You need him. You need those, but you need everybody else. One of the things that was concerning during that spell since July 1 is that really good teams, and all teams go through a slump, but really good teams have, when the team is really down, they have one or two guys that pick up the other team members and carry them on their backs. That didn't happen this time.
That's what I'm talking about with a stud pitcher. They need a stud pitcher.
Well, they're pitching. They have a shot, all right? You said I'm negative. They have a shot. They have a good chance. They don't have a great chance because they're not a great team. And you have 4 teams, 3 of which in the division I think are more talented than the Brewers. You have 4 teams that are all within 3.5 games of each other.
Now, St. Louis has come down a bit because they don't have their catcher.
And the Brewers, they have very good starting pitching. They don't have great pitching. Their ERA is right around that 4 mark. So you're going to need 4 or 5 runs a game to be in ball games. And I'm not so sure. I thought during that bad stretch, they showed that they could not handle pressure and play well against good teams.
20 seconds. Attanasio a brilliant owner. Is he going to bring somebody big in?
I don't doubt that he would. I think, first off, the Brewers are resilient. They're young. They're hungry. And that will be the difference maker going into the second half. I also think that they do need better relief pitching. They're still aggressive with their bats. That will turn around, as was proven in the All-Star game.
And for relief pitching, they're going to get Henderson back. That'll be as good as trading for somebody.
All right. A few more thoughts now about the violence in the Middle East as Israel and Hamas step up the fighting in and around the Gaza Strip. Rick Horowitz can't help noticing things and raising questions. Rick.
The little boy is lying on the sand, face down on the beach with his head mostly turned toward the camera. You can see his right ear, part of his right cheek, and a bird's nest of curly hair. He could be asleep on that beach, taking a quick nap maybe after an afternoon of soccer with his cousins, until you notice his legs. His right leg bent at an impossible angle. He's on his stomach, this little boy, and yet his right leg is somehow pointed above his shoulder, his right foot nearly at his cheek. An impossible angle, at least for a living person. He was alive just a few moments ago. In fact, he was playing soccer with his cousins. And then the explosions, the Israeli explosions on the beach in Gaza City. Now the little boy is dead. So are 3 of his cousins. Later, there'll be the video of the exact moment when one of the mothers finds out, when she learns that her son is one of the dead boys. We'll see it on the TV news and again online and again on social media. She could be a mother anywhere. Her grief, any mother's grief at such a heart-stabbing loss. And you can say what you want about the fog of war and how mistakes happen and how civilian casualties are inevitable and how at least the Israelis don't deliberately target innocent civilians. And I say to you, doesn't matter. This can't continue, not in a 24/7, instant-on, always-on media world. Not when the cameras are there to show us these things while they're happening. A little boy dying, a mother grieving, victims with faces. And we can debate whether the Israeli attack is disproportionate to the threat, but 4 little boys dead on a beach will always be disproportionate to our sense of acceptable conduct. So we're heartsick. And you also have to wonder, what does it mean for making war, for making policy? Can any country, any democracy that relies on the public's consent do the necessary and occasionally horrible things it does when we can see the consequences as they happen? Could D-Day have had a day 2 with all that dying covered live? Could Lincoln have withstood blood-soaked tweets from Gettysburg? When the honor roll on the NewsHour fills the entire hour and beyond, name after name, face after face, what then? I don't pretend to have answers. What I have is sorrow for a little boy lying on the sand.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.